Valencia, who is the Chief of Service Deputy Director for Budget of Development, Pillar, and Human Rights Office Program Planning, Finance, and Budget. Valencia has worked in the Finance Division of the United Nations, where she rose to the rank of Deputy Director. Valencia, without further ado, I will yield the floor to you for your presentation. And thanks to technical difficulties, we took a couple of minutes for you, but please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Marco, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone, to the distinguished delegates. And I do have to express my thanks to the Permanent Mission of Switzerland and also to the representative of UNITAR for this opportunity. So thank you so much. Let's go to slide number 2. Okay, so in this presentation, which deals with drafting resolutions, it will cover the resolutions of the committee with the emphasis on resolutions relating to the program budget. The first part of the presentation will review the legislative framework, and we will also look at roles and processes. For the second part of the presentation, we will do a resolution case study, which will be a deep dive into a GA resolution number 74262. In the end, we will look at some current issues that may impact the drafting of resolutions for 2021. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so on slide 3, what is a resolution? So resolutions are collective expressions of member states which are agreed in the context of an intergovernmental process. Resolutions serve to provide legislative mandates to the Secretariat. The intergovernmental organs that are considered competent to provide legislative mandates to the Secretariat includes the General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, the Human Rights Council, and so forth. Resolutions also may be issued by competent regional, sectorial, or functional bodies. Resolutions and decisions have the same legal status. However, decisions are normally used for procedural matters, including elections, appointments, time and place of meetings, and so forth. So on slide 4, we go forward to slide 4, we are looking at the legislative framework. So the legislative framework is anchored in the charter under which the Secretary General presents the budget as Chief Administrative Officer of the organization, and the GA approves the budget. GA Rules of Procedures numbers 96 to 133 guided the functioning of the 6 main committees of the General Assembly, including the 5th committee. Rule 125 indicates that decisions shall be made by voting. However, in practice, the 5th committee aims to reach decisions by consensus. This aim for consensus is guided by GA Resolution 41213 that indicates that the 5th committee must obtain the broadest possible agreement. The quest for consensus means formulating a position that every member state accepts, which often is only achieved after several layers of formal, informal, and informal consultation. In terms of Rule 153, it is important because it guides the 5th committee in considering the budgetary implications in draft resolutions adopted by the other main committees. The PPBME and the financial regulations and rules set out the roles of the various actors in this process, including the role of the 5th committee, the ACABQ, the CPC, and the oversight bodies. So these are very good documents to review as you study the legislative framework that governs the work of the 5th committee. In addition, various relevant GA resolutions also provide elements of the legislative framework, as well as several Secretary General bulletins and administrative instructions. So on slide 5, moving forward to slide 5, which covers the role of the 5th committee. The fifth committee has a key role in administrative and budgetary matters of the organization, in particular because the committee drafts the resolutions relating to the assessed budgets of the organization. In drafting its resolutions on the reports of the Secretary General, the fifth committee considers the conclusion and recommendations of the ACABQ and the CPC. The fifth committee then recommends adoption of its draft resolutions to the General Assembly. In addition to its own agenda, the fifth committee considers the statements of budgetary implications resulting from mandates emanating from the other 5 main committees of the General Assembly. If we move forward to slide 6, on slide 6, we look at the evolution of a resolution document. So this is a pictorial presentation of how the resolution document moves from the skeletal stage to an approved resolution of the General Assembly. So the first 4 stages, the skeleton, the compilation of proposal, the provisional draft, and the final draft are all under the processes relating to the fifth committee. So if we go forward to slide number 7, slide number 7 takes this process and details it a bit. So if we follow slide number 7 on the processes related to resolutions, we are starting from the vertical boxes on your left. So this looks at the typical resolution process. And I say typical because every resolution process is different, and it's controlled, of course, by the Bureau. So there are many variations to the process. So this process concentrates really on resolutions relating to the proposed program budget of the United Nations. So if we start with the vertical boxes on your left, we see that the fifth committee holds formal and informal meetings and considers the reports of the Secretary General along with the advice of the advisory committees. Then the coordinator formulates the skeletal text of the draft resolution, usually endorsing the position of the ACABQ, and the first reading is conducted. Then the coordinator sets deadlines, submission of language, and also deadlines for submission of information from the Secretariat. The committee members submit language proposals to the coordinator, and then the Secretariat consolidates those language proposals into a Rev 1, and after approval of the coordinator, circulates this Rev 1 to the committee. The committee then conducts its first reading of Rev 1, where members introduce and explain their proposal, and then the second reading is conducted. Normally, after the second reading, PPVD issues a paragraph-by-paragraph costing of the in-progress draft resolution. So we are at the horizontal boxes now. So after the Secretariat issues that costing, the committee informally negotiates and normally adopts by consensus a draft text that is issued as a provisional draft resolution, an L document. Following that, the L document is formally considered by the committee, and the final L document is issued in the report of the fifth committee. Finally, the GA approves the draft resolution, and we have the formal ARES document, and that is issued and published on ODS. The Secretariat then issues issues appropriations and implements other actions on the basis of the adopted General Assembly resolution. Now, this is a broad, typical process that shows you how the document is developed from the skeletal stage to the final resolution that is published. On slide 8, moving forward, we look at, on slide 8, okay, we'll move forward to slide 8. Okay, yeah. So on slide 8, we look at a structure of a typical resolution. So a typical resolution has the name of the adopting organs, it has preambular paragraphs, operative paragraphs, and it also may have annexes. The preambular paragraph sets the background to the resolution, often capturing previous resolutions. If we can go back to slide 8, I think I'm still discussing slide 8. Structure of a resolution. Okay, good. So under the preambular paragraphs, which sets the background to the resolution, these often capture previous resolutions on the issues, and preambular paragraph provides an introduction to the operative text. Preambular paragraphs normally begin with verbs ending in ing, for example, recalling, but may also begin with verbs such as convince, adjectives such as convince. Preambular words at the beginning of the paragraph are normally italicized, and the paragraphs are normally factual, not numbered, and each paragraph ends with a comma. Operative paragraphs, on the other hand, are designed to express opinions or convey decisions or request actions to be taken. So as you know, the operative paragraph are actually are considered the more important paragraphs of the draft resolution. Operative paragraph usually begins with a verb in the present indicative tense, which is italicized. Operative paragraphs are numbered, and each paragraph ends with a semicolon. If we flip over to slide 9. Okay, so slide 9 gives some examples of preambular text, and most frequently used are the terms reaffirming, recalling, recognizing, and having considered. So these are some keywords that are used in the beginning of preambular paragraphs. On slide 10, moving forward, we have a similar table on slide 10 with operative text. Now, operative texts, as I mentioned, are key to the resolution document, and I've highlighted in red those that are examined to determine if there are any additional budgetary implications. So when we have text such as approves, authorizes, decides, endorses, further requests, resolves, supports, we normally look, these are normally indicative of language that we have to examine in case there are any budgetary implications. So we have to use these words with that in mind, that the budgetary implications may result. Okay, if we jump to slide 11. On slide 11, okay, slide 11. Okay, on slide 11, I've set out some tips for drafting resolutions. So keep in mind that the goal of the entire process is consensus, and actions that facilitate consideration of proposals are important. So these include the use of previously approved resolution text as applicable, expressing each idea in a separate paragraph, being aware of text that may result in budgetary implications, which is usually more difficult to gain consensus. It's also important to use operative text consistently. For example, the word take notes in a paragraph normally conveys disagreement in resolutions of the fifth. So it's important to use these words consistently. Take notes and recalls are two words that we encourage to be used consistently. And we'll look at some examples of these when we do our case study. Clarity of resolution language is also very important, especially as regards text with financial implications, so that the text could be accurately costed. The text that requests action of the Secretariat, for text that requests action of the Secretariat, clarity is needed to ensure there's no ambiguity between member states' expectations and the Secretariat's interpretation of the requested action. But there are times when non-specific text is intentionally used for purposes of consensus or for political purposes. As regards editorial issues, there are many rules relating to use of italics, acronyms, short form, punctuation, dates and currency, and so forth. So my advice to you is that as you draft, do not worry too much about editorial rules, as the C5 Secretariat will ensure editorial correctness of your draft resolution. So let's go to slide 12. So slide 12 okay, slide 12, please. Slide 12 sets out the case study, which is an examination of GA Resolution 74262. So we'll go right into the case study, which starts on slide 13. So we are looking at this resolution, resolution 74262. So we'll move forward to slide 13. Okay. So slide 13 it shows us a picture of that resolution, 74262. So this resolution is on questions relating to the proposed budget for 2020, and it sets out the collective expressions of member states as regards the proposal made by the Secretary General for the level of post and non-post resources that will be funded by the regular budget for the year 2020. It also authorizes for 2020 the staffing table for entities funded by the regular budget. So with that in mind, we will look at the exactly how this resolution 74262 was developed. So if we move to slide 14, slide 14 shows us the skeletal text of the preambular paragraphs that were developed as we developed this resolution. So in this case, the skeletal text was developed by the coordinator with support of the C5 Secretariat. And you will see that the preamble of this skeletal refers to past resolution, in particular those that were reviewed to shape the present resolution. In the second paragraph, we note that it sets out the reports that were considered. Of course, it's the report of the Secretary General on the proposed program budget, and also the related reports of the ACAPQ and of oversight bodies. So in the preambular skeleton, we started by reaffirming the relevant resolutions and then having considered the reports that are before the committee. If we move over to slide 15, slide 15 captures the skeletal text of the operative paragraph. So let's move to slide 15. Okay, slide 15, please. Okay, so this slide captures the skeletal text of the operative paragraph. So the skeletal text normally starts with proposing endorsement of the conclusions and the recommendation found in the report of the advisory committee. This is considered the starting point of negotiation. So in this case, the skeletal text uses the term reaffirms. It reaffirms the regulatory framework that was used, and then it goes into the endorsement of the conclusions and recommendations of the ACABQ. So this is the starting point of the development of the resolution. So if we go over to slide 16, slide 16 shows us the next step, which is a compilation of proposals. So member states submit proposals, and this is an actual document that we recorded as the resolution was was being developed. So the member states submit their various paragraphs, and you will see that as we compile these paragraphs, we also we order them so that the alternative paragraphs are arranged together. So we have all the paragraphs which are different proposals that cannot be adopted together, and those all paragraphs are arranged together. So in this case, we had 102 and 102 alt and 102 alt 2. And alt 1 bis and alt 1 tier are used to insert proposals that are somewhat similar to alt 1. So this gives you an overall idea of how those proposals are compiled and presented, so that all of the relevant proposals are presented together, so the negotiation process can start. So if we go forward to slide 17, slide 17 looks at some of those submitted proposals that have financial implications. So we have some proposals relating to post, and in this case, we have a decision not to approve an upward classification. And then we have non-post proposals. For example, decides to reduce the non-staff compensation by 5%, and a decision to reduce consultancy and experts by 20%. So these proposals that have direct financial implication are costed by the program planning and budget division, even the alternate paragraph. So we have quite a task to do, to take all of this information with financial implication and cost the proposals. Now, the costing allows the committee to fully understand the implications of each paragraph as consensus is sought. And it also allows the budget division to quickly update the total post and non-post resources being requested when the consensus is finally reached and the provisional draft resolution. So if we go forward to slide 18, slide 18 shows the provisional draft document. So this is the formal provisional draft. It is developed in English only, and you will see it carries the limited distribution label. You see it carries the symbol of the fifth committee, C.5, and it has an L symbol and a sequential number that is assigned by the fifth committee secretariat. You will note also that the provisional draft is submitted by the chair after informal consultations, and that is indicated at the top of the resolution. In some cases, a provisional draft may be submitted by a sponsor, and the name of the sponsoring countries would appear at the top of the resolution. So after the provisional draft is considered, is sent to the fifth committee for consideration, and we'll go to slide 19. We may have amendments to the provisional draft, and that is shown on slide 19. So on slide 19, we have an example of an amendment to the provisional draft within the formal meeting of the fifth committee. So in this case, there was an oral amendment that was proposed. And in paragraph 18 of the report of the fifth committee, you will see that at the same meeting, the committee adopted the draft resolution as orally amended. So oral amendments can be made as the provisional draft is being adopted in the fifth committee. Now, this is normally done by consensus, but in some very rare situations, voting may be required. And just to note that the controller or members of the budget division is present at these formal meetings to inform the committee if any oral amendments have any implications on the appropriation being requested. And just to note that provisional draft resolutions may also be rejected by the fifth committee or withdrawn by the sponsor. So if we go over to slide 20, slide 20 shows the report of the fifth committee in which the adoption is recorded. So in reports A74614, it records that the fifth committee recommends to the General Assembly the adoption of the following draft resolution. So the responsibility of the fifth committee as it finalizes the consensus draft resolution, it communicates formally to the General Assembly that this document is ready for adoption. So in slide 21, we have a picture of the final resolution, and you will note that it carries the symbol RES, A for the General Assembly, RES, to show that it's a formal resolution, and it indicates that the resolution was adopted by the General Assembly on 27th December based on the report of the 5th Committee, and there's a link to that report embedded in the formal resolution. So this is the final document that is issued and formally sets out the views of member states. So in slide 22, we are going to look at some of the actual language in this resolution that and try to interpret some of this language. So on slide 22, we have a paragraph 8 in this resolution, and these are actual language in the resolution that we're studying. So paragraph 8 says, it endorses the conclusions and recommendations of the ACABQ subject to the provisions of the present resolution. So what does this terminology subject to means? It means that the conclusion and the recommendations of the ACABQ that are not mentioned in the resolution are endorsed by the General Assembly, and the exceptions are contained in the resolution. So everything that is not discussed in the resolution that the ACABQ recommends is endorsed formally. Okay, so let's look at another paragraph on slide 23. So slide 23 captures paragraphs 14, 15, and 16 of this resolution. And in paragraph 14, it requests the Secretary General to continue to strengthen internal controls. Now, the interpretation of this is that the Secretary General is also working towards is already working towards the strengthening of internal controls, and accordingly, this is not considered what we call a hard mandate. So, because this request is to continue, normally a request, we examine requests to see if there are any program budget implication, and because the word continue is used in this paragraph, we will not put program budget implication on this language, and we will implement this request within existing resources and structures. In paragraph 50, there's also a request. It's a request to the Secretary General to clearly link the budget inputs to tangible results. Now, if you examine this request in paragraph 15, the word request here is not used as an operative word. It's not the italicized word at the beginning of of paragraph 15. So it's included in the paragraph, but is not the operative word. And as such, the interpretation of this again is that this request will not have budgetary implication, but will be implemented as much as possible within existing resources and structures. If this request was at the beginning of paragraph 15, we would interpret it slightly differently. In paragraph 16, there's an encouragement of the Secretary General to continue his efforts as regards results-based budgeting. So this encouragement, again, is not a word that we will use to put budgetary implications forward, and again, this request will be implemented as much as possible within existing resources and structures. If we go to slide 24, slide 24 has another example of interpreting language in this resolution, and this is a decision. We have two decisions here. We have a decision to apply a vacancy rate, and we have a decision to approve the staffing table. So these are clear, firm decisions that must be implemented. The issue with this is that the GA approves both the staffing table and resources, which actually may be in conflict due to the approved vacancy rate. And this issue was mentioned by the director Jan in his presentation just before me. So this is something that we introduced already. So if we flip over to slide 25, we again have some attempting to interpret language We have the fourth example of interpreting resolution language on slide 25. Now let's move forward to slide 25. So in the case of slide 25, in slide 25, we have a request to provide information on financial and human resources. Okay, I think we moved to 26. Let's go back to 25. Okay, can we go back to slide 25? Good. Okay, so this is the fourth example of interpreting resolution language. So slide 30, so paragraph 32 of the resolution requests the Secretary General to provide information on financial and human resources implications for the use of extra budgetary resources. So this language is a bit ambiguous, and we are saying that this language may lead to subjective interpretations by the Secretariat that may differ from the intent of member states, because the language is very non-specific. So the Secretariat will try and is expected to carry out some sort of related action within existing resources and structures. Now, this non-specific language is actually sometimes helpful and sometimes intentionally used to express a request without budgetary implications and or to arrive at some consensus text. But what the message here is that we should try to have specific language where possible, unless there's an intentional use of non-specific language to arrive at consensus. In slide 26, we have another example, example 5 of interpreting resolution language. And in this case, it's a take notes. So it takes notes, this paragraph 74, take notes of the paragraph of the ACABQ and decides to establish GTA, 3 GTA in the Vienna Investigations Office. So in this case, take notes is usually used to show disagreement. So in the interpretation here is that the recommendation of the ACABQ, the ACABQ actually recommended to establish 2 GTA positions, and that recommendation is not supported, and the General Assembly is deciding to establish the 3 GTA that were proposed by the Secretary General. So in this case, and in most of the resolutions coming from the 5th Committee, the word take notes indicates a lack of support of what is being referred to. So the encouragement here is to use the word take notes consistently. Although in other resolutions we have noted the word take notes is rather neutral, but in the resolutions of the 5th Committee, it indicates lack of support. On slide 27, we again have another example of interpreting language. So example 6. So in this example, the General Assembly is recalling a paragraph of the ACABQ and deciding to approve an amount of malicious acts insurance policy for 2020. So the interpretation here is that the ACABQ analysis for recommending a reduced amount was considered, and the amount approved was reduced from 4.8 million to 3.9 million as recommended by the ACABQ. So in this case, the word recalls was used with a positive direction. The General Assembly is recalling the advice of the ACABQ and is recommending and has approved an amount based on the recommendations of the ACABQ. Now, in terms of the word recalls, we notice sometimes it's used differently. So if we go over to slide 28 and we look at our next example, or last example of interpreting resolution language that is captured in slide 28. In this slide, the General Assembly is recalling the report of the ACABQ on a particular paragraph and is deciding not to approve, not to take the recommendation of the ACABQ. So the ACABQ analysis and recommendation to approve the reclassification proposed by the Secretary General was considered but not supported. So in this case, the word recalls is used by the ACABQ. It is used where the ACABQ recommendation is not supported. And we are saying that such variation in the use of operative text sometimes impacts the interpretation and poses challenges for the costing of the Secretariat. In a case like this, um, additional words such as perhaps take notes would be clearer to us, because take notes always suggests that the ACABQ's paragraph is not supported. So sometimes there's some variations, and that those variations, we're saying that it makes our work a little more difficult. So consistent use is really the key here, the key message. So let's go to slide 28. So that is the end. Sorry, slide 29. So that is the end of our case study. And in this case, on slide 29, we are just looking at issues that may impact 2021. We just look at the process from 2020 and the actual draft, the actual resolution that came out on the program budgets for 2020. In the case of 2021, my director, Jan, mentioned these recommendations of the ACABQ, and we know that there are 3 recommendations of the ACABQ that may multiply the areas for which consensus would be needed for the resolutions on the proposed program budget for 2021. And in particular, the recommendation on the application of entity-specific vacancy rates. Because there's so many different vacancy rates, this will indeed multiply the areas for consensus. So just to bring these to your attention again, because they were also highlighted by Jan in the earlier presentation. So if we move forward to slide 30, slide 30 captures just a little note on the impact of COVID. COVID has impacted us all, you know, and the timeline and procedures for consideration and adoption of the resolution may have to be amended to allow for silent procedure. So COVID has impacted us all, and the GA and the Bureau of the Fifth Committee will decide on how the silent procedure will work, and including, if necessary, how voting will be conducted. And of course, the negotiation process will may largely be done virtually, and that brings it at minimum some nuances to the process, which I'm sure that you are considering at this point. In all of that, we are here to convey the commitment of the budget division to continue the same level of high quality support to the important work of the Fifth Committee. So we give you our assurances that we will continue to support your important work, and if necessary, we will be there in person if requested. So slide 31 ends the presentation, and if we go forward to slide 31. Okay, slide 31. So slide 31 is the final slide, and I leave the new delegates with some references for your further reading, and I wish good luck to all of the new delegates. And I thank you, and I give it back to Marco. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Valencia. Thank you very much for such a comprehensive presentation of the United Nations resolution. Is a paramount important process for the delegate of the Fifth Committee, but it's also an important process for the whole work of the United Nations. You went step by step with language, with case studies and things like that. I don't know how to thank you for these kind of real guidelines for all the participants. This is recorded. We have also the PDF presentation. You need a copy, you wanted to review it, please contact us, send us an email or information about what you specifically need. Valencia already said that they will be ready to support all your queries. Also the director, Mr. Johannes, has also said that they will be there. I am very happy to hear that you will be debriefing once again the delegates in this virtual mode on a presence manners in during the deliberation of the fifth committee. It's a remarkable presentation. I'll appreciate that. Let's see, we do have comments. Let me see. There is a question for me. Johannes, you are still with us?
Yes, I am.
I am something related to you. In the chat button, I don't know if you managed to read it. Is thank you for the presentation. Will examples for the examples provided. We also heard on the previous presentation that there were 8 programs, including in peacekeeping, that did not reach consensus and approval. Most of these were due to the semantics, lack of agreement on terminology. Can you, Mr. Wiseman, please provide a brief example of one of these and how the non-agreement impacted the program in the field in the midst of the current pandemic? I don't know if you get me, if I interpreted well the question.
No, certainly, Marco.
I yield to you now.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the question. An example, well, what always creates a bit of discussion is the use of human rights-based work, whether that's explicitly approved or not, especially if it is in the context beyond the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights itself. So there's some discussion on that. There were some discussions on terminology around the gender issue. Of course, in the case of DMSPC, it's the regional parity or the regional representation as opposed to the country representation. The concept of regional representation is not formally approved, so that generates discussion. Can we use it if it's not formally approved as a concept? And the challenge with this is, of course, programs use words as they wish to select to describe something. The challenge is when the word is perceived as something beyond just the choice of a word, but something as a concept. Once it becomes a bit more of a concept, then it kind of is easier to or more likely to generate some discussion because the concept has not been approved. And as you can imagine, that's a somewhat blurred line. It's not so easy to decide when a word is used as just a word that is used in many, kind of operational documents, and when it's actually a concept that the SG formally puts in its reports. But it's around that blurred line that those decisions or discussions take place. And some member states feel it shouldn't be there, not formally approved. Others feel that that's just an element of their work and they are free to describe it in that way. So that's a discussion that often occurs. I hope this helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. Yes, I think it's a very important question, and thank you for you staying with us for the 2 sessions. I always said that this section is one of the most important ones because it's a hands-on for delegates. Is the resolution process, which is the core work, what I do, and the implications of the budget and financial situation of the United Nations is of paramount important for member state as well as for the secretariat. So once again, distinguished delegate, please let us know if you have more questions. We have 2 more sessions coming up for tomorrow and after tomorrow. So our dear friends, Johannes and Valencia, will be ready to address those questions if they are addressed to us. With that, I'll appreciate your participation to both of you from UNITAR and from Switzerland Mission. Thank you very much. We have to move on. We are actually getting time. Valencia was speeding up. I'll appreciate that. I know she skips on some slides, but those slides, I see so many questions asking if we will be able to provide them. Yes, these will be downloaded. You can check it on the UNITAR New York office, and in the website there will be the PDF presentation of Valencia and also Johannes. So, and when you receive it and question arise, reach us out. We'll be able to support you once again, and they will be also interacting with you during your sessions of the Fifth Committee General Assembly.
Thank you.
Johannes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Marco.
Thank you. We move on now, and I wanted to introduce our dear friend, Mike Hammond. Are you with us, Mike?
Yes, I am.
Thank you very much. This is a new, what do you call it, modality. Is a TED Talk. It's a panel, and I will ask our dear friend, Mike, Consular of the Permanent Mission of Switzerland, which is also responsible for communications and elections, one of the most important functions also of the United Nations election. And this is the representative of Switzerland to the Fifth Committee. And hopefully we will have him in the bureau of the 76th session of the General Assembly to introduce TED Talks and this new modality. May I say that Mike has been working with us shoulder to shoulder in crafting this program. Mike will introduce the segment and the panelists, as well as the moderator of the panel. Mike, I yield to you, and thank you very much for the support.
Thank you, Marco, for this kind introduction and into UNITAR for organizing this course now for the fourth time. I would also like to thank the previous speaker. It's always interesting also for me to catch up on many things that it's good to have a refresher. I would first of all welcome all the new delegates to the Fifth Committee. I have arrived 1 year ago, and so this course has proven itself very useful to navigate through the very complex processes and the thematic subjects. And so I hope this really helps to get you a good start. We try to improve this course every year. We have been in contact with the Bureau to see how we can actually maybe add new elements. And such a new element is actually this TED Talk, because we thought, well, it's actually was a proposal that came from the Bureau itself. First of all, from Melina, from the Permanent Mission of Cyprus, who is in the Bureau with the outgoing chair. And we actually wanted to add an element to have an exchange with delegates and give some insights to maybe go through some practical questions. Maybe we hear some anecdotes from the different participants. But I think this is a very good new element, and I'm very grateful for this, actually this suggestion to do this. So I've already mentioned Melina. She will moderate the TED Talk. She has been all over during the last year with the outgoing chair, and played a big role to get through these different sessions, especially the first resumed, the second resumed, that was held virtually. But she's by no means only a Fifth Committee expert. She has proven herself very efficient also in the Security Council and other bodies. So she is someone who really knows the UN inside out. Then in the panel itself, we have different representatives, say also from the regional groups. Georgie from the Permanent Mission of Georgia. He is actually vice chair of the Fifth Committee. Then my dear friend Tiago from the Permanent Mission of Brazil, also vice chair. Then Katlego from the African group. He was coordinating the position of the African group and is one of the most influential delegates in the Fifth Committee. And last but surely not least, Jill from the Permanent Mission of Australia, who was actually with the chair from the 73rd session. And that brings with it that she has a big knowledge of the processes, and all of these people have not only, let's say, worked as delegates, they were sometimes in the bureau, they have facilitated. And without further ado, I will actually give now the floor to Melina. And I think this should be also to some part interactive, so the possibility to ask questions. So enough from me, and now give the floor to Melina. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Mike, for your kind introduction. I think you have been too kind when introducing us. So we are really excited to be with you today. We have been looking forward to this segment of the meeting. As it was mentioned, my name is Melina. I have been assisting the outgoing chair, the permanent representative of Cyprus, Ambassador Mavrogiannis, during the chairmanship of the Fifth Committee for the 74th session. After this morning session, which was surely informative, yet maybe a bit intimidating information-wise for the newcomers, we will now move to a more informal exchange, which will hopefully be a bit more fun and interactive. We are most grateful to the Swiss Mission and UNITAR for providing this opportunity to hear from seasoned delegates of the Fifth Committee. I think it's most valuable, especially given the fact that we are now working remotely, and the newcomers to our committee do not really have the opportunity to meet and exchange with other delegates in person. I'm truly pleased to be with the delegates that were mentioned by Mike. We will hear from them and interact with them. They are admittedly some of my favorite colleagues, with whom I worked very closely during the Cyprus chairmanship, and to whom I'm deeply grateful for our excellent cooperation, their invaluable support and friendship. When you get to know them, you will realize I'm not exaggerating. They're not only great professionals and competent colleagues, but above all, they're wonderful people and truly inspiring to be around with. From my part, it's just great to be able to show you that there are indeed some fun people around that make the daunting task, the daunting work of the Fifth Committee more bearable. You have heard a few words about their background. However, we will start by giving the floor to each one of them to present themselves and also give us their personal perspective, their insights about the workings of the committee. And through their personal experiences, I guess we will be able to get a glimpse of the workings of the Fifth Committee, particular culture of the Fifth Committee. After the short round of presentations, where hopefully we will get to hear about their best and worst moments during the 74th session, we will move to questions. I have prepared a couple of questions for each speaker, and in the same time, we will invite you all to write your own questions or remarks in the wall. and then revert to them at the end. I just wanted to say to complement what you've heard already, that this part of the seminar is entitled TED Talk. This was inspired by another meeting that we had a few months ago, which comprised mostly of monologues by experienced facilitators. However, we decided to make the segment today a bit more interactive so as to have a more conversational format and to make it more interesting for everyone. But it is still based on the TED Talk premise of people sharing their personal experience and their subjective insights. So without further ado, I think we can start with Tiago, who will be presenting himself and talking about the best and worst moments. And bear in mind, I took a guess, so I'm waiting to hear.
Hi, Melina. Thanks for this brief introduction. I would also, just before I begin, like to thank Mike and the Swiss mission, UNITAR, and the entire team of the Secretariat who's putting up this course together. I think it's very helpful, and I think it's an opportunity to welcome the new colleagues and give them a glimpse of what the work is. My name is Tiago Poggio. As said, I am from the Brazilian mission. I have been in New York now at the UN for 2 years. I had a very quick experience in the 3rd committee when I first came, the first couple of months I was here. And then I moved to the 5th committee. At the time, it was funny because many people were like to me, are you insane? Why would you move to the 5th committee? They have this crazy working hours. It's the most difficult committee. And I was a bit intimidated by those comments, but I have to say that I do not regret it at all. I think there's a lot of camaraderie that you find out in the 5th committee, as you will see. Proof of that are all these kind words that Melina and Mike have said. I wouldn't know if they're all completely true, but so that's definitely from that source. So briefly, I think my best experience must have been having been a member of the Bureau in the 74th session. It was a really good opportunity to get to know some colleagues better, and you also get a very important glimpse of how the 5th committee works, how the UN works. You get to understand a lot of the work. You work together with colleagues from the Secretariat, and it all gives you a very deep knowledge of and a broad understanding of the whole thing. So that was definitely a very, and it marked for sure my period in the 5th committee. I will miss it in this session. It's going to be fun not being a part of the Bureau, and then you like in being told what things were decided and not being part of that small group configuration. So that was a good one. As for a worst experience, I mean, I'm start by saying something. It's maybe a silly thing to say, but I'll say it anyways. Even the worst experiences will teach you valuable lessons. In the case of negotiating in the 5th committee, I mean, maybe it sometimes is frustrating, but it can teach you, I mean, self-knowledge, what your limits are, what your expectations should be, and it can teach you to have like real and feasible expectations, and I mean, how to control them, and it can teach you how to better negotiate for an upcoming session, for an upcoming negotiation. So it doesn't have to be all that bad. It can also teach you some lessons on people. I mean, who you can trust, who you should not trust, and how far you should go or not. So everything can be seen from a good point, I think. That being said, my my worst experience, I would have to say, was the negotiation of the cross-cutting resolution of the peacekeeping operations. The thing is, this is a very important resolution, but there is such a level of divisiveness in the committee that we haven't been able to adopt it for, I think, 4 years now. So it's very frustrating when you first come and you're eager to adopt it and you think, no, this time it's going to be different this time around. And then in the end, it's so difficult that people just give up. So it's a bit frustrating when you have put so much effort into it. And so for me, that was the most difficult, let's say, experience. And I will pass on the floor to my other colleagues now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiago. I can certainly relate to most of the experience you just mentioned. And I'm curious to see whether your experiences coincide with the other vice chair, the other bureau member of the 74th session, Georgi from Georgia. And I love how his name rhymes with his mission.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all hear me. Yes. Well, first of all, good afternoon to all the colleagues. Welcome to the new delegates. Many thanks to Swiss mission, as was mentioned by my colleagues previously, and to the UNITAR and to the Secretariat for really very useful and essential workshop training. This is a life-saving for the Fifth Committee delegates, and I know that it was mentioned a lot of the times that there's a very big chunk of the information coming in. So in the beginning, this is a kind of a rock that you can lean on. Absolutely. Well, as was mentioned, I'm Georgi from the Georgian mission. Georgi from Georgia. I know you cannot make it up. I'm also here for 4 years now. I have been covering the legal issues, meaning the Sixth Committee plus the Fifth Committee. I've been in foreign service for 16 years. Here at this point, you just try to remember why it was a worthwhile idea to, enter the foreign service. It's like it's been too long, but it's been gratifying like every day since that. I think like it's and before we get all serious, right? And I was encouraged to do an anecdote. So just for you to know, of course, whatever happens in the Fifth Committee stays in the Fifth Committee. But I think that, and my colleagues will share this with me, if there is any chance that you can now close this training app and not do the Fifth Committee, this is the moment, guys. This is the moment before we enter into the turmoil. There is a chance for you to run away. But on a serious note, I think the question of what would be the best and the worst experiences in the Fifth Committee, this is one of those times in life when both of them can be the same, meaning that you are dealing with a very specific kind of a working methods in a committee. They're very different from all the others. Doesn't make them any better or the worse, but they're just there. And of course, you have a lot of fatigue going into the long hours. You're working a lot. There's a lot of negotiations, mostly very tense. And sometimes especially for the new delegate, it's very difficult to find this, the ground where you're like trying to justify and understand why so much work is going and there's a really small amount of progress at a certain point, because then of course, as you know, we all miraculously appear to have agreements on the most part. And I think that, of course, this is something that is absolutely great about the committee, because then at a certain point through the different means, you see how much what you do has an immediate impact on the ground that affects the lives of the people affected with the crisis, the conflicts, and so on and so forth. And of course, I think in that sense, I totally agree with Tiago. Being part of the Bureau, first of all, was an amazing responsibility, because you're entrusted by the regional group to be that person that can connect all the different angles and be their representative, a collective interest. And it was amazing experience, absolutely. In that sense, you are having, for that period of time, you're having the hat of somebody that is playing for all sides, pretty much. You are the one who is contributing immensely to the success of the committee, and there's no longer groups or national interests or so forth and so on. I mean, the more important part is that you need to contribute. So in that sense, I would agree with Tiago. I think we will go into more of a details, of course, about the experiences, and there will be questions. So I'm really happy to answer anything else at this point. That would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgi. As you can tell, we have really strong bonds with the Bureau members of the 74th session, and forgive any inside jokes that might come up, but indeed, Georgi, you're right. That was my thinking when reflecting on the subject of today's session, that somehow the most challenging and the most rewarding moments are paradoxically the same. So now we move to Katlego. Katlego is a person that you will need to know for this session. He's an incoming member of the Bureau of the 75th session, vice chair, and also he was the chair of the African group during the 74th session. So Katlego, to you. Can you unmute your mic, Katlego?
Apologies, I'm still trying to catch up with all this technology. We need to get back into the UN. No, thank you for that, Milena. And
Katlego, I think we missed some of the remarks you just made. Your video seems to be frozen. If you can repeat, thank you.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Now it's much better, Katlego.
Yes.
Yes, thanks.
You can hear me now?
Yes, Katlego, now it's fine. You can proceed. Thank you.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Yes. No, thank you for that, Milena. And let me also start by giving my thanks also to the to UNITAR and the Swiss mission also for this opportunity. I think if there is anything that we need to appreciate on annual basis is actually seeing this trend being kept. I've been here since the 69th session, and one of the things I've always appreciated was this initiative by UNITAR to continue at least, you know, assisting new delegates to come on board into the Fifth Committee. So as an introduction, I've been there representing Botswana for the last, I believe it's 6 years now. I can't continue counting, but that's since the 69th session. And as an expert in the Fifth Committee, I've also been double hatting, both as an expert of Botswana and also as the chair of the Africa group in the committee. As you will notice, the Fifth Committee has 193 member states like other committees, meaning it's been represented in such a large number. But not all of us can speak when you are in the Fifth Committee, obviously, especially Q&A negotiations. In essence, you tend to, you know, align yourself with groups. So in this case, Botswana negotiates under the ambit of the Africa Group and the G77 in China, as that is where our power and strength lies within this unity of the group. So in a nutshell, that is me. And looking into the other issue that Melina just highlighted, that there are a few people you may like to meet or have a discussion with. I guess I'm not the only one. There are quite a lot, some of them positive enough for you. They are here today in this particular meeting. You've got Georgia, you've got Tiago, you've got Jill, even Melina herself, even though she may be from the 74th session. If you need an ear and you are from the Africa group or the G77, trust you me, you may like to approach people like Melina, as they tend to listen before they give you their perspective. And the same also goes with my colleague Jill, who, once she takes the floor, you'll understand why from her group, she's one of those people you may also like to link up with every now and then. I'm mentioning this as part of the introduction so that delegates understand one key thing about the Fifth Committee. Not everything is from what you read. All that voluminous documents you're going to be given is half of what you need to know. The other majority of what you need to know is within the network and your relations with other committee members. In essence, this is where actually coming to the second issue of the best and the worst experience in the 74th session, I will give you an example. For me, the best of times in the 74th session, funny enough, was during the pandemic and in the main session. And then secondly, also, the worst of times was also in the same period for two reasons. Without the Fifth Committee, a lot of things in the organization don't move. In other words, you are the very people who the Secretary General and the 37,000 UN staff rely on. You can imagine from human resource, you can imagine to peacekeeping, all the funds that come in and go out. These are the very key things that enable the organization to continue. But most importantly, if the Fifth Committee doesn't negotiate and come to an understanding, then everything else is at a stop. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is, for me, the best experience in the main session was on program planning. And the best of experience was in the second resume session during negotiations of the peacekeeping session. Pandemic or no pandemic, you had to come up with a $6 billion budget for the peacekeeping, for the organization. And it meant that a lot of the differences that myself, Jill, Georgia, even Tiago had to put aside in order to get a consensus, because that's how you get the budget. And it proved that emotions in the Fifth Committee have no room. It proved that patience in the Fifth Committee is the only way to get consensus. So that for me proved the strength of the organization itself. It proved even the strength of the Secretary General and his team in making sure that every now and then they try and see how they can work with the member states. Because you'll notice the one difference about the Fifth Committee compared to most committees. In the Fifth Committee, what we believe is normally what goes on paper. It's not entirely the case where you would think that, questions like capital, what is the UN saying? In the Fifth Committee, the UN is member states. It's not anybody else. So we proved that the organization can function at any time. And that for me was the best moment in the during the negotiations of the main and the peacekeeping session. And the worst moments was, well, the very traditions of the Fifth Committee. 3 consecutive nights of no sleep. I think there was a time I slept just 2 hours, sitting down in the dining room in my apartment for 3 days, 24 hours through, 24 hours in the middle of negotiations on one agenda item that two agenda items that I will not speak about today, but I'll speak about once we're in. But these are the 2 main regional entities in Africa and another one in Europe. The committee could not come to an agreement on these 2 main regional bodies. in the peacekeeping session. For over 9 days, we could not come to an agreement. Over weekends, we could not come to an agreement, late in the night. But at the end of the day, despite the West, we did manage to come to an agreement, and we did manage to at least give these entities their budget, and we did manage to ensure that every one of us, 193 member states, have something credible to report to our capitals, because that is the other thing that you have to keep in mind when you're in the Fifth Committee. So I'll not take much time, but I just felt that the best and the worst should be highlighted. But through you, Melina, just to also highlight one key thing, that despite all the stories you may hear about the Fifth Committee, the late nights, working late into December, like Georgie has just mentioned, it is in the Fifth Committee that you get to know the entire United Nations organization, because this is the only committee where every draft resolution that has a budgetary implication, whether it's from the fourth committee, first committee, third committee, as long as it has a budgetary implication, it comes to the Fifth Committee. As long as rules and regulations are not being observed, it comes to the Fifth Committee. It means that even in your missions, each one of you, you will get to know what your other colleagues are doing in first, second, third, fourth, and sixth committees. So it gives you an overview of what the organization is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Katlego. You sounded very wise. And I couldn't agree more on everything that you said. I even share your worst moments of the sleepless nights. It's just that our difference is that my worst moments were during the main session, when I was sleepless as you were for many days in a row. I was practically incapable of holding my eyes open. But my best moments were the same moments in the second resume session, when I was negotiating in my pajamas from my bed, thinking that the alternative would have been the UN basement. So now, last but not least, we go to Jill from Australia, the delegate who was in my shoes during the 73rd session, assisting the chair of Australia, and the one that I am personally forever indebted to for all her help and support and friendship during our chairmanship. Even though she's much younger than me, I tend to say that when I grow up, I want to be like Jill.
Well, thank you, Melina. I don't know how to take all of these lovely compliments, but thank you very much. You know, I'm your biggest fan as well. And welcome to all of the new delegates. It's a pleasure to meet you virtually, and I hope one day soon we'll get the opportunity to meet one-on-one, either in person or virtually as well. As Melina mentioned, I was supporting my former ambassador when she was chair of the Fifth Committee in the 73rd session. I've been in the committee now for 3 years as a delegate, and this is my first overseas posting. So the Fifth Committee has really been a baptism of fire in learning diplomacy and about how the UN operates, but I can think of no better place, as Katlego mentioned, to really learn about how the United Nations works. So welcome to the committee. In terms of the best moments, I think mine are similar to what others have mentioned, and I think you'll find if you ask other delegates who are not here today, they would probably actually agree. We're a pretty friendly bunch as a committee. I know some other committees, you hear some pretty serious stories from how their committee operates, and we absolutely have differences in positions quite frequently, but that doesn't stop us from being friends and getting along really well on a personal level. And I know whenever we all come back together again, it's like coming back to school. Everyone has missed each other over the summer and really enjoys each other's company. So hopefully, even though we're operating in a virtual environment, you can also see that for yourselves and feel welcome in this committee. And on that, I would encourage everyone to don't hesitate to reach out to anyone at all. You might think it's a bit strange to send someone a WhatsApp or an email or just call them just to introduce yourself, but I think relationships are really important in our committee, not only because it's nice to have, but also to achieve the outcome. So I'd encourage new delegates, especially those who are new to the UN altogether, to try and build your networks as early as possible, when you have time or capacity. And also don't hesitate to reach out if, as the session is happening, to reach out to others to say, I have no idea what's going on, or what is the background on this issue, or why does the committee do this? This seems really crazy to me. Guaranteed, we've all been there in the same position. So make sure you have your support network as well. It's a bit of group therapy for all of us every session, I think. In terms of the worst moments, I try and block out worst moments of committee sessions. Otherwise, I wouldn't get out of bed for the next session. So I try to sort of not think about them too much, and I try to be optimistic about how the next session is going to operate. But I think, as others have alluded to, the late nights and the weekend work is definitely the worst. As an Australian, I really value work-life balance, and I think it's crazy that we operate at 3 and 4 in the morning. I don't think anyone does their best thinking or their best work that late at night in any industry, but it's what we have to do as Fifth Committee delegates to, as Kat Lego said, to get things done for the field and for the UN. And it's important to keep that perspective about why we're doing it, even if you really want to have a nap or to go home and shower. So yeah, like Melina, I was very happy that I was negotiating at 4 a.m. in my pajamas at my dining table, as opposed to being stuck at the UN. But hopefully with each session, I think we can try and improve the working methods. And I encourage all new delegates who come to the committee, if you can see a better way of doing something, or you think there's a better way of operating, please suggest it. Just because the committee has done something for years does not mean it's set in stone. Cultures evolve, and as the committee membership changes with different personalities, the committee has even changed in the 3 years that I've been here. So do make suggestions, do try and think if there's a better way to do things and operate. Don't just listen to veterans like me who say, oh, that's not the way we do things. Just ignore me and try and push through and find a better way. So I'll leave it there so that we can move on to the rest of the conversation, but it's a pleasure to meet you all virtually.
Great advice, Jill. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for your interesting remarks. Now, as we said, we will proceed to the questions part. I will be asking a couple of questions to each speaker, but in the same time, I invite colleagues who would like to ask their own questions or take the floor for any remarks to indicate so on the wall on the right, and I will be collecting your requests and revert to them. So firstly to Tiago. Tiago, if you can enlighten us a bit about the role of the Bureau, and when the Bureau members express their opinions in the context of the Bureau, who do they represent, which constituents and groups? Also, I think it would be interesting to hear what type of decisions the Bureau is expected to make, and maybe how does the Bureau communicate its decisions to the committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Melina. Let me try to, I was thinking about how to put this in a very graphic way. So I'll start by saying that there are 5 regional groups in the UN normally. So we have the Asia Pacific group, the Western European and other group, the Eastern European group, the African group, and the group of Latin American and Caribbean countries. One thing is important to say is that membership is not always obvious to these groups, so it might be helpful to take a look. Many people are taken aback exactly by the fact that Cyprus belongs to the Asia Pacific group, even though it is a Mediterranean European country, we would say, and even part of the European Union as a negotiating bloc. So it would be helpful to just check, just to not be surprised sometimes. I would also like to stress, and this is quite important, that these regional groups, they are not the negotiating blocks that we have at the Fifth Committee. So normally the Fifth Committee, for most of the items, you will have, for instance, the G77 negotiating as a block. The G77 is a huge group. We have Brazil as a member of the G77. We are 134 countries. And I think we have members from all the regional groups except from the WEOG. So that shows a little bit how these regional groups are not negotiating blocks. And when you are in the bureau is is responsible for the, let's say, the organizational decisions of the committee. We are not taking substantive decisions at the bureau. So the bureau will discuss, for instance, the agenda items, when they will be taken up by the committee. Which slots are they going to be used? Is the session going to be extended? The bureau is also responsible for appointing facilitators. Facilitators are the colleagues. This will be explained later on, I think, but are the colleagues that coordinate the negotiation of an item. So that's also a decision from the bureau. The bureau works in close coordination with the ACABQ, which is also a very important organ for the Fifth Committee. And that is important because by then we know about the timings of some of the reports that the Fifth Committee has to consider, because sometimes a report might be late, and then we as a bureau can better analyze when to assign this specific report to the consideration of the committee. So these are the sort of decisions that the bureau makes. These are, like I said, these are not the negotiation. So it's quite different. The bureau will normally hold meetings during the sessions. The bureaus tend to hold weekly meetings, and your representative, the representative from your regional group, will probably coordinate with their group, and then later come back and inform. It should be made clear that the bureau member should have a clear mandate from that group when negotiating. The bureau member won't always touch base, I think, because many of the things are very intuitive, or once you get to understand how it works, you kind of know where you can go or not. But it's important to, if you're to keep a close contact with your bureau representative, because then you get to know where things are going and what to expect. The bureau normally communicates with the membership. I think the most direct way is probably these weekly meetings, because after each weekly meeting, your representative will send out a summary of that meeting to you, so that the entire membership knows what was discussed, what decisions were made, and what has not been decided yet. And then by that way, you sort of create a network of information, and it's very important to have that information flowing so that everyone is on board of the decisions. Other than that, of course, there's informal consultations with colleagues from the regional group whenever deemed necessary. And also formal addresses during the formal sessions by the chair. So the chair will normally address the entire committee with information that they think are important every now and then. Normally during these the formal sessions. Of course, now in the COVID times, formal sessions have been greatly reduced, so things are a little different. But that would be normally the way that things work. In terms of the interaction with the bureau and the broad membership. So one advice I would have is for you to get to know who your regional representative is, and ask them questions, because these are, I know all of them, the 5 ones taking up now. These are seasoned people. They know what is going on. They will be able to explain you if you are uncertain about some things, and keep always a close contact with them. It's good. I had one very good friend in my bureau, in my regional group, which was Cuba. And I was talking to her the other day, our colleague from Cuba, Yaima, and she was like, "Oh, I must have been a pest because I was always asking you, I was always on your neck. What have you decided? What have you not decided? You should do this, don't do that." And I'm like, "Oh, actually, it's quite the opposite, because that sort of gave me guidance and you know where to go." So don't be afraid of pestering your bureau representative. That's why they decided to take up that job. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiago, for this very elaborate reply and for citing Cyprus as one of the most awkward examples. I had many colleagues coming up to me and telling me that it was indeed a surprise to them to discover that my country, Cyprus, was in the Asia-Pacific group. So we have another question for you. Which were the most difficult items that we considered during this 74th session? And which of them, I guess, are the main items that will be deferred from the 74th session to the 75th session? And on that, what would you advise based on your own experience when they are taken up during the upcoming session?
Oh, thanks, Melina. And thanks for your remarks. Indeed, the Cyprus thing being on APG, I was like, what? When I first heard it. So I think I think the most difficult items I would say that have been deferred was probably HRM. HRM, I mean, human resource management, is a huge item. It comprises several resolutions on different aspects of HRM. So, for instance, you have the amendment to staff rules and regulations. It sounds maybe, I mean, I don't know how it sounds, but it's definitely quite intimidating. It's a huge report. It has, and it makes reference to the staff rules and regulations. So it's very serious because it changes things that are very complicated and very complex to understand. So this is a very difficult item and very contentious too. HR strategy, desirable ranges. These are just a few of these HRM aspects. This is definitely quite difficult, and this they have been deferred twice in the past session. So we tried to take them up in the main session of the 74th. It was not possible because we were discussing the budget, and it's a very complex and difficult discussion. So they were then postponed to the first resumed session. And then in the first resumed session, we were all surprised by COVID. It upended our world upside down. It was very difficult to keep the negotiations going. So it was further deferred to the 74th session. So I would expect this to be a very difficult item to take up here at the 74th session. It's going to be difficult at the 75th. It's going to be difficult for everyone. They're supposed to come in the first resume session next year. Another item that should be mentioned is one that has been, I like to say, haunting us for quite a while now, which is GSDM. GSDM is the Global Service Delivery Model. It wasn't technically deferred because even the decision on it being deferred proved extremely contentious. I mean, these are how things are in the Fifth Committee. Sometimes nothing is ever quite simple. But this item is coming again now, and it's a complicated item as well. That's the reason why it wasn't decided even before. So as an advice for those items, I mean, I would like to recall something that Jill said and Katlego. I mean, you all have said it prior than me, like reading the reports is very important because that's where you have the basic information. You have to kind of understand it and grasp what the thing is about. But then the networking, I mean, talking to people and asking questions and trying to understand. Sometimes if you're just really starting, you're going to read a report and it doesn't make much sense. It's quite overwhelming, to be honest. And so don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask questions in the room. ask questions to your colleagues, ask questions to bureau member, to other people. It's really the only way to understand. Sometimes there's a little nuance and you can't really understand. And another important thing is to identify your national priorities when taking up these things. The agenda of the Fifth Committee is extremely broad, and the reports are long, are difficult to read, and are sometimes quite complicated and technical. So it's quite impossible to do everything. So identify your priorities, especially if you're from a smaller mission, because I mean, the bigger missions sometimes have more people, and then they can split the work. If you can't, I mean, count on your colleagues from your regional, from your negotiating block, if you belong to one. Try and burden share as much as possible, and I mean, and really identify possible partners inside your groups, outside your group. That's also important, because sometimes people are on the other side of the table, but they don't necessarily have a opposite position from yours. I mean, it can be complementary at some point. So it's important to talk and understand. And I mean, that's kind of the advice that I had. And then to end on a funnier note, I was thinking, I mean, well, how can I end? I mean, because sometimes the Fifth Committee and the UN can feel a little bit like this painting that I have here, you know, like this block of concrete, and you're pushing it. And but it's not really, it's not always that lonely. Sometimes you will have a bunch of people on the other side pushing it against you too. So it's even more complicated. And everybody knows this. It's a famous essay that was used at some graduation many years ago. It's a text that says like, wear sunscreen, and it's sort of advice given to students. And well, you can definitely forget about the sunscreen, because as long as we're back at the UN, we will be buried in the basement. There's definitely no need for sunscreen. That's not something I would recommend. But I would do recommend you bring some water and healthy food. Otherwise, you're gonna finish the the main session 5 kilos fatter like I did. So beware.
Thank you so much, Tiago, for your illustrative examples and the practical advice you provided us with. Good luck to all of us during the 75th session. And if I may comment on something that you said, we have to recall one of the basic lessons that we learned when joining the diplomatic corps, in that we should keep the questions that we are truly ignorant about for contexts like UNITAR. So feel free to ask those questions here, and ask in the room only the questions that you already know the answers to. That's a very basic thing that we should all have in mind. Now we move to Georgi. As you all know, the first and second parts of the 74th session were conducted remotely due to the constraints owing to the pandemic. But since it is expected that the Fifth Committee will continue with online meetings, it will be useful to hear about the most intense differences in working practices and procedures of the committee in comparison to working in physical meetings, and maybe to hear a bit about the advantages and disadvantages that emerged from working remotely. Thank you.
Thank you, Melina. Yeah, I think it's very important aspect of the committee's work, and I think that also Jill before and the speakers before they mentioned that there is this legend behind working methods of the Fifth Committee, right? Every incoming delegate to UN heard the legends about how difficult it is, the long hours, and so on and so forth. And of course, during the seminar, I'm sure that it was elaborated that there are 3 sessions, main, resumed, 2 resumed ones, what are the dates, and especially with now UN trying for the second year in a row the annual budget system, that kind of reshuffled the whole items on the agenda of the sessions, and there are a lot of things that are influencing why the Fifth Committee's work is so peculiar and why it is so different, right? So you have, of course, in the times of pandemic, when there was a huge blow to our working methods in general, and the foreign service and diplomacy, in my mind, probably represents like 90% of human interaction, and you are inevitably dealing with a lot of obstacles and challenges that you have to overcome with the different means. So before you would have most of your time as a Fifth Committee delegate you would spend at UN, because you would have the formal meetings, introductions. You would also the conference room 5 would be your home for like a long period of time, because you would have the Q&A sessions there. You would have informals. You would have first reading. You would have then you would move not too far away, but you would move to the couches. Then you would have a smaller group couches, and then you know, there would be time would be flying. The Christmas, you miss it. You come home. Kids hate Santa, right? So it's terrible. It's terrible. But in a sense, what we as a bureau of the 74th, we had this unique kind of a perspective on things, because we have started with the conventional working methods in 74th main session, and then as we entered into the first resume, the pandemic started to hit off, and then we started from the physical meetings at UN, and then finishing second resume with absolutely 100% virtual working. And in that sense, of course, I think the committee, everybody agrees that we somehow benefited from that, because you have to understand that at a certain point, the negotiations and proceedings are becoming very tense. You have teams that are having more than one delegate negotiating, because it's physically impossible to go on without a sleepless nights. So committee pretty much is spending, and I'm sure like once we become more friends, all of us, and we will be interacting more, we all be probably sharing some of the photos from the previous sessions of a lot of the delegates sleeping on the couches, or even like, you know, fighting over as Diago mentioned, fighting over the last bag of chips in the vending machine. You know, I'll trade you this para for the Coke, and, you know, I'll give you chocolate, you give me, you know, another 5 million, so on and so forth. But on a serious note, I think the advantage is that we somehow had this more physical component and more into the human touch, meaning that we had colleagues that are working from home, that are having a bit more of a rest when it's needed, and it's essential, because as the session progresses until the very last moment, it's all about the nerves, your ability to maintain, you know, the sanity at a certain point, the way that you interact with the groups, because again, the Fifth Committee is a very difficult one. You have enormous groups, groups that are negotiating very complex issues, and of course, as gratifying as it is working in a committee and working on the issues, and a lot of colleagues they mentioned it, that are having an immediate impact on a lot of the issues, because this is budget. So it's like cross-cutting through every single thing that you do in the organization and different committees. It's also it's a huge responsibility. So you wouldn't have expectation that things move forward really fast. They do not, and it takes a lot of diplomatic skills, a lot of flexibility, a lot of knowledge, a lot of professionalism on the part of all of us to arrive to the point where, as most of us love to say, when everybody's equally unhappy. So I think that the advantage probably is in a certain point that we're working from home in that sense, because we are able to recuperate fast enough to come back and hit off where we left. I'm sure that, of course, more experienced colleagues like Jill and Katlego will have more to add on this. Yeah.
Thank you, Georgi. In fact, we have a question on the wall that is pertinent to what you just said. So if you can elaborate, we received a question saying, looking back on your own experiences, what would be the most important piece of advice you can give to brand new Fifth Committee delegates, especially given the COVID context and the lack of opportunity to develop relationships, since we will continue for some time in this virtual environment? What would be one piece of advice you can give to new delegates?
So I think, yeah, it was mentioned. It's all about the communication, and especially when you have a problem when, as I mentioned before, 90% of, in my view, of our work was actually meeting physically at UN. You would go for a coffee, you would, you know, share a cigarette. It's not that I'm promoting smoking here, don't get me wrong, but like, you would, there was a time we had a delegates lounge also where you would share probably something like a beer afterwards. So there were a lot of venues where you would form this professional / personal relations. And in the times where we do not have an opportunity to enjoy this, I think it's something that we have to a bit shift from the conventional views on the things, and like just pick up the phone, call, introduce yourself, say that you're a new delegate. I know it sounds a bit weird, but let me tell you one thing. Being almost chained in the basement of organization for months make people get closer, you know. It's a bit spooky concept, but that's the way it is. Every end of a session, committee emerges as being more friendlier, you know, having more personal touch, having more understanding and flexibility of the other side's position. So it's very much beneficial in that sense. So I think, and I understand absolutely the challenges that the new delegates might have. So I would think that, you know, just picking up phone, dropping an email, social distancing coffee, you know, anything can work. Anything. Let's start from the beginning, and I think you would enjoy jumping into this boat. Yeah.
Thank you, Georgi. I think this is useful to hear. We got a kind reminder that it's 12 o'clock and maybe we should provide a bit of shorter replies, but we do have one more question for you. Regarding facilitating items, would you encourage colleagues to volunteer for coordinating items, and why? And what would you advise them to do or avoid while facilitating?
That's a very good question, and I think it is essential for new Fifth Committee delegates to understand that. And I can speak from my perspective because, you know, as a delegate of Georgia, I also found it very difficult to somehow try to fit into the proceedings and the global picture of the committee in the beginning. And in that sense, 4 years later, I can tell you that every single expert, every single delegate that is working in the Fifth Committee has its own role. This is not a committee where you, unless you're representing one of the negotiating blocs, there's nothing for you to do. On contrary, the delegates should volunteer for facilitating, because this is an amazing role, because you are best posed to be this mediator, to be a neutral hat-wearing professional that can actually help let's put it this, big groups and big players to arrive to that successful point where there is when there is a successful negotiated outcome. And each one of us have our role, facilitating, being in the bureau. They're all experiences. So I really regret that I didn't do this the first year I was dealing with the Fifth Committee, because I could have been way more advanced in forming my network, being knowledgeable about it's not only the papers, it's also what the story behind every item. And let me take this opportunity also to say how lucky all the Fifth Committee delegates are with having a secretariat that is working with us. They're highly motivated professionals that have been doing this for years. And trust me, guys, when you're entering 5th or 6th sleepless night and you're negotiating something or you're facilitating something, you're a coordinator, this call at 4 a.m. with essential information is a game changer. So in that sense, also have that courage, because you're not alone. There is also a secretariat behind that, and they will assist you in everything possible, of course. So I think it's a great experience. It's a great experience, and I would recommend that. And of course, bear in mind that, again, communication, talking to the as a facilitator, talking to everybody, knowing what is the temperature inside and outside of the room. What are the small group negotiations? What are stakes that people are having? These are all very, very important. And I just want to say that, like, from my perspective, with the international legal background, I've been in a lot of negotiations, a lot of difficult negotiations. But like, you're doing this almost every session when you're entering into the long nights of negotiating, and they're difficult, but they will benefit you a lot. They will benefit you a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgi. Indeed, we are blessed to have the Fifth Committee Secretariat on our side, and exposing ourselves when facilitating comes with a lot of tangible benefits, as the current chair has been saying over and over again. We consider the facilitators an extension of the Bureau. Now turning to Jill. Jill, you have been assisting the chair of the 73rd session, as we said. So since the chair's team is not so visible, could you elaborate on what is the role of the chair's team, and also maybe explain what is the informal troika of chairmanships that was established? Thank you.
Thanks, Melina. And I think you and I are part of a very exclusive club of Fifth Committee delegates who have had the pleasure of supporting our ambassadors to chair the committee. The chair of the committee, being the chair of the committee, is a very busy job for our ambassadors, as you know. I had other people in my mission supporting me as negotiators, so that really helped to free me up to just support my ambassador. But it's a dual role, so you're not only supporting your ambassador, you're also a bureau representative. Even though your name is never listed anywhere, you are still representing your regional group. So it's actually a really big job. The chair themselves has a lot of meetings with the bureau, with the Fifth Committee Secretariat, with senior members of the Secretariat, such as USGs and the Controller, the chair of the ACABQ, with other delegations, other regional groups. So really the person who's supporting the chair, or the team that's supporting the chair, is helping the ambassador to prepare for all of those engagements. But that means the person supporting the chair needs to know exactly what's going on across the whole committee at all times. They need to know where the agenda items are up to. They need to know what the agenda items are about, what the sensitivities are, and to come up with ideas on how to fix or unlock problems, to come up with talking points. And often the chair's support person also represents the chair at different meetings. So it's actually a really time-consuming job. So I'd echo what Georgie and Tiago and others have said about making sure you go to your bureau representatives. I think the natural tendency for a lot of people in the committee sometimes is to go to the chair's support person with questions, which sometimes is very appropriate. but I'd encourage you to go in the first instance to your bureau representative, because they probably know the answer to the question that you have, and it will free up the chair and their team to focus on the more strategic issues that the committee needs to grapple with. So that's just a plug there. In terms of the Troika, this is actually an excellent initiative of the Cyprus chairship, which we were very happy to support. As you mentioned, it's informal, so it's just a structure to ensure continuity between the previous chair, the incoming chair, and the future chair of the committee, so that each chair doesn't have to start from scratch. It's a lot, as we've probably conveyed, and I'm sure the new delegates are picking up through this excellent training, is there's a lot of stuff to get across with the Fifth Committee, and it's really hard if you're taking over the chairship to immediately understand what some of the sensitivities, what some of the history of these items that come up year on year or every 2 or 3 years, that can be quite difficult to navigate. So we were very happy to support Cyprus in this role, and I know Cyprus will do an amazing job supporting the incoming chair of Uruguay to just help them better understand what the procedures and processes and history has been. And it's also a great opportunity to come up with new ideas. There were a lot of things that we would have liked to have done during our chairship that we just didn't have the time or capacity to do, or that we only realized at the end of our chairship would have been good to do. So to have the opportunity to pass that on to your ambassador and to you, Melina, and for you to take on those ideas to constantly try and find a way to improve the committee and for the committee to evolve for the better was something we were really happy to support. So I think it's a great idea, and hopefully it will continue through the decades and just get stronger and stronger.
Thank you, Jill, for shedding some light on the burden of work of the invisible teams that are supporting the chairs. And also, I would like to say that the Troika that we established was inspired by the generous support that we received from the Australian mission and you personally, and we are committed to doing the same with Uruguay, the upcoming chairmanship. Jill, you have been the coordinator on program planning during the main session of the 74th session, as well as the leading coordinator for the costing of the peacekeeping missions during the secondary Zoom session. What would be the advice for the colleagues who will be following these items during the 75th session?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think a few others have touched on these as well. But just to summarize, I think preparation is always important. So of course, reading the SG's report, the ACABQ report, the final resolution, but also the draft resolutions from previous years, if you can get your hands on a copy. They're not on eDelegate, but usually delegates who've negotiated it before may have saved a copy somewhere. So it's really important that you speak to previous negotiators and that they can provide you what's called a Rev 1, which is the compilation of all of the draft submitted language from different delegations. Also read the supplementary information. So that is available on eDelegate from previous sessions. So we now have access to the ACABQ supplementary information, which is great. So there's almost too much information, but if you want to spend the time really understanding some of the big and important issues, you need to spend the time doing the preparation for it. And also it means it saves time and energy of the Secretariat answering questions to you that may have previously been asked. But as others have said, the important thing is to speak to other delegates as well. And as I think it was Tiago said, don't just speak to those within your own regional group. Make sure you speak to other negotiators from across the committee, because you will pick up different bits and pieces from different people. And it's great to have those relationships with them if you're negotiating against them, because you need to have that trust already established so that when you reach a difficult point or an impasse, that you have that trust already built up and that you can unlock whatever's blocking the progress. And it's hard to do if you aren't already on good terms with somebody. It's not impossible, but it definitely makes it harder. So each agenda item has its own dynamic. So just if you've negotiated something doesn't mean that that dynamic is going to transfer over to another item. So some of the big ones a lot of the negotiations actually happen bilaterally or offline. So as Georgie mentioned, it used to happen on the couches or in other parts of the UN. Nowadays, we have more informal Zoom calls that somebody might set up. So as a facilitator, I didn't always need to be part of those discussions. And in some cases, it's not actually appropriate for the facilitator to be part of very small discussions, but just keep in touch with the facilitator. Otherwise, they will harass you endlessly. I harassed Cadlego endlessly during the second resume session, but he was also very good at keeping me updated on where things were happening and saying, I'm talking to other delegations, don't worry, don't worry. So I left him to get on with the work. So communication, as Georgie said, is super important. So just make sure you keep all the key players informed. But as a facilitator, the chair and the bureau will come to the facilitator to say, where are things up to? What are the blockages? Where are the sticking points? Does the chair need to get involved with anyone? How can we help? So the facilitator needs to know what's going on, which is why they will contact delegates quite regularly to get updates. I think, and this goes to one of the questions I saw in the chat group as well, I think some of the best and most successful negotiators I've seen in the committee are very solutions focused. So they don't just say, this is my position and stick to it stubbornly. Of course, we have our positions that we need to achieve at the end of the day, and that's really important to do. But you need to find a way to get a solution and an outcome. So proactively reach out to others, listen carefully, because sometimes what is written on paper isn't necessarily the key position. Sometimes we all have to put in language to keep our capitals happy, but at the end of the day, we can probably live with a resolution without it. But there's another element that we really must have for a successful conclusion. So really listen and try and understand what the key issues are for different delegations. And if the language isn't acceptable to you, try and unpick whether there's a different way to phrase it that would be okay with everyone, but still get the core essence of what that delegation is trying to get in the resolution. So you've really got to understand and unpick and get through some of those issues to meet everyone halfway to find a satisfactory outcome. I remember before I came on my assignment, I did some negotiation skills training, as I'm sure many of you have in your capitals as well. And I remember the course convener said, in a multilateral negotiation, everyone has to be as equally unhappy, which is a very negative way to put things, but I always keep it in mind that no one should walk away from a multilateral negotiation thinking, I got 100% of what I wanted and they got 0%, because that will lead to problems further down the line. So everyone has to have won something and lost something, and everyone will be as equally happy or unhappy for the good of the UN and for the good of what we're all trying to achieve here. So just trying, as I said at the outset, try and keep a bit of perspective about what we're all here to do and really what's important at the end of the day, and be clear about what your real red lines are, not what are just nice to haves because you spent so long drafting the language and thought it was a perfect way of phrasing it. So that would be my recommendations from the facilitator's point of view, but also as a negotiator. And I'd just to quickly echo what Georgie said about facilitating, I think it's a great thing to do to volunteer to facilitate. I think it's a really great way to better understand how the Bureau operates. It's a better way to build your networks and to also understand how the committee as a whole works. I actually facilitated in my very first session without ever having negotiated, which was tough. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but I think like Georgie said, in your first year, it's a really great way to and I think especially in this virtual format, there are some items which are pretty easy and a bit more straightforward to do. So your bureau member will be able to tell you which things might be appropriate for you as a newcomer. If you've been in the UN for a little while, you might be able to take on something that's a little bit tougher because you might better understand the processes. But virtual or non-virtual, I think it's a really great way to better understand the committee and get to know everyone. And in fact, on the virtual format, it might be better to do it because you're not getting to meet everyone in person. So it's a really great way to elevate your profile and your contribution to the committee very early on. Thanks.
Thank you, Gillian. Very invaluable advice there, especially not losing the perspective and making sure that we interact with colleagues from all constituencies and groups. Now to Katlego. Katlego, except from you, who are the other members of the Bureau of the 75th session, if you can tell us? And also, colleagues may approach the Bureau members with what kind of requests? And which new items can you mention that will be on the agenda of the 75th session?
No, thank you for that, Lena. Members of the Bureau of the 75th session, you've got Jacob from Poland, Isaac from Turkey, and well, of course, myself from Botswana. And then we'll also be having Terence of Singapore, who will be there as our rapporteur of the committee for the 75th. And of course, as you've rightly noted, as part of your own tracker, will be led by the chair, Ambassador Carlos Amorin, and his assistants, including Alison from Uruguay. These are going to be the Bureau members of the 75th session led by Uruguay. And then your second question with regards to the typical type of requests or questions that may be posed even to the Bureau. Well, normally, I think, and it's, it's not that it's cast in stone, but normally and traditionally what you would have noticed over time is that some of the typical issues or questions that would be raised normally would be delegates wanting to, as my colleagues have rightly said, coordinate. I think Jojo spoke about this. There may be issues that you may want to chair, one or two agenda items that you feel you want to chair. So obviously what happens is you would normally approach your regional member because he represents your own constituency. And then at the same time, there may be agenda items that during discussions, you feel that, no, I haven't during Q&A gotten all the answers that I want, or I haven't had the opportunity to ask all the questions that I may have wanted. So normally it's a trend. You'll notice that as, let's say, Katlego from Botswana, I'm a member of the Africa group. So obviously I'll speak to both the agenda item, and I'll also highlight that to my own Bureau member that I think we need another Q&A, for example, to take up. And then I think another bigger issue within the Bureau that we are also going to be looking at is with regards to, there may be issues that you feel that they have not been included in the list of agenda items for that particular session. So sometimes you may actually request to have that agenda item to be included in the that particular session, or you may request to actually have an agenda item removed from the session for whatever reasons. An example, we are in the middle of a COVID situation. We are going to the main session. Now with all these 26 to 27 agenda items before us, not all of them have budgetary implications. So we may, during negotiations, decide that we don't have enough time to deal with agenda item A or B. If you as a delegate feel that, you may raise that with your Bureau member and also with your own regional group, whether it's the Africa group, the G77 or WIWO. And then that item can get escalated and discussed, and that's how it's normally dropped out of issues to be discussed. But that is where, Bureau members would also be coming in, and they're very important. Now, another issue that I know within the Bureau that others may not know how to actually tackle it may be an issue that you'll notice is very topical, especially in different regions. And that is, issues like interpretation, for example. That's issues of, can we have this agenda item discussed, especially for the main session, can we have this agenda item discussed in the UN instead of discussing it virtually online? Those are issues that may end up coming that you may want to raise with your Bureau member. And rightly so, your Bureau member's job is to communicate this to the rest of the Bureau that, my constituents are saying they want to discuss agenda item A or B virtually, or they want to discuss it in person in the UN. And decisions are then made, immediately from there through the Bureau. But I think one key point that I will just highlight here, Milena, is the fact that, and it's an issue that has been actually, it was before you, and it has also come to the 75th Bureau members to discuss, is this issue on interpretation. You know, that is something that actually was raised by delegates from the G77 and from the Africa group for us to discuss this thing in the Bureau. And that's just something so typical that, you know, it was brought by constituents of our own group for us to be discussing inside the Bureau. So that is something that colleagues are just going to notice that is going to be ongoing, because not all of us, for example, can speak French or can speak English. So here and there may be issues that you feel you need interpreted, especially for your own benefit. And then to move on to the other thing that you also highlighted was which agenda items we are going to be having, which seemingly look new and are not, you know, the typical agenda items you have during the main session. Among these, we are going to be having the report of the Secretary General on the review of implementation of the General Assembly's resolution 72/266, that is on shifting the management paradigm in the UN. As you know, one issue just building onto this that I may encourage colleagues to look into is the United Nations reforms. The Secretary General, when he came in, there are certain you know, issues that he came in and wanted to at least leave as a legacy. And normally, typically, you'll hear in the Fifth Committee, we like just saying the Secretary General's reforms. That's just a typical way of us, you know, highlighting them. And this is, for example, the management, shifting the management paradigm in the UN. There's, I know, the peace and security pillar reform, and another one on the development system. But the one we're actually going to be discussing as an overview or review from the SG is going to be implementation of the management paradigm. So I would highly encourage colleagues, even though you've got a list of agenda items to be looking into, I would highly encourage you to ensure that if there's an agenda item you don't want to even miss, is this particular one. That is one of the key agenda items that you should attend, because one way or another, every one of your PRs are going to ask you a question interrelated to this particular reform agenda item. And it's because when you are talking about management reforms, you are talking about HR issues, you are talking about management in its entirety, you are talking about budget issues, you are talking about, somebody just mentioned the global service delivery model. I'll leave that for a later stage once you are inside the committee. It's a very interesting agenda item that the previous Bureau, Julia, Tiago, and Melina had to somehow diplomatically deal with, because even within their own regions, there was not one understanding. Every country had their own understanding and their own standpoint. But this is an issue that runs across the board, including even ICT. So I just wanted to encourage you to ensure that you look into that particular agenda item. And then the other reform issues will also be coming up, as I just highlighted. As you know, for example, there are a lot of pilot cases that are actually happening within the UN, including, for example, this annual budget. It's a pilot, but that's just part of the reform processes that are actually undergoing. So that is why I'm actually saying ensure that you have a better understanding of this, because even within your own mission, do not be surprised when your accountant can even approach you in the Fifth Committee to ask you, why are we, for example, receiving this payment plans on annual basis and no longer every 2 years? That's the management reform. These are the many things that are just brewed from the reforms themselves. And then just to move on to the last issue that I can just highlight, Milena, within the questions that you had raised, to say to colleagues that I think to encourage you as the first starting point when you are joining the Fifth Committee, firstly, your character within the Fifth Committee will be a clear interpretation of even your foreign policy, of your country's foreign policy. Let me give you an example. Right now, I'll take Mike, for example, from the Swiss mission. If ever I want a bit of somebody who's a bit tolerant on issues, and I need somebody who can back the entire committee up to come up with a consensus. Go to the Swiss mission. Normally, you'll find that they are not biased on most things. So they'll actually support you on that. And they'll actually support you in trying to come up with a consensus issue. If you want somebody who is going to bring about a bit of, should I say, icebreaker during heavy burden issues, go to Georgia. Those are part of the people who will at least bring a bit of life during discussions. If you want somebody who is going to find a bridge during negotiations, Melena is one of those particular people you may like to approach. And then if you want somebody who will take on the hardest task during the committee, even on those agenda items that are not liked by many people, go to Jill. In other words, what I'm saying is, nobody, for example, want to take program planning in the main session. You may wonder why, for example, we ended up pushing people like Jill to be one of those people who would be the icebreakers for such an agenda item. Nobody during the peacekeeping session wanted to be the one coordinating the budget. Imagine coordinating 6 billion, and you've got hard people like myself who will keep on saying, no, I need time, who even if they are approached by undersecretary generals will keep on saying, I have a group mandate and I'm going to go with my group mandate, who will even, tell you that, look, I have heard you, but this is my stand. Can we continue to negotiate? You need people who have got a certain rapport. So what I'm trying to say here to all of you here is, the only way to succeed in the faith committee, you have to get to know the key people. You have to get to know the strengths of each and every individual. When I say each and every individual, I mean the key individuals. They are not difficult to see during negotiations. And then you have to get to know the charisma of everybody. In other words, there are certain issues you must never take to a certain member state. And there are certain issues you must take to a certain member state. And this is the only way to manage to, get to finding a consensus. And then lastly, also, let me just note that it's important to know your own group's position and your country's position. So first and foremost, know your country's position. Take your country's position to your group chair. In this instance, if you're from the Africa group, take your country's position to your chair of the Africa group, who will then interpret that position to the chair of the G77. If you are from the like-minded, you do the same. You discuss within the like-minded first, and then obviously through whoever is the one leading that agenda item, that's when that chair will actually negotiate that agenda item with the other chairs. If you try to go as one country alone, imagine going as Botswana against 193 member states. I can assure you, you will not succeed. Networking is the only way in the faith committee. Being tolerant and patient without emotions is the only way in the faith committee. In the faith committee, there's no room for being emotional. I'm saying this because there are times when 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, you may have 5 or 6 delegates who are not agreeing with you, and you feel that everybody is just on you and on your case. That is not the issue. They have a mandate to defend from their country, from their group. You just have to find and be able to pick the loophole within. And try by all means also to listen more than talking. The more you listen, you'll be able to identify 1 or 2 issues that, which often does happen, may slip when your colleagues are speaking. So learn to listen more than talk, because every time your partners, or if I'm from the G77 or Africa group and your colleagues are speaking, listen more to your partners. Every time they talk, listen. There's 1 or 2 things that they may say that may slip, that may give you a hint of actually how to proceed. And then lastly, through you, Chair, since I did mention about the groups, there is a tradition also very informal within the faith committee group where you have regional meetings. I know the EU have their own regional meetings. I know the like-minded have their own meetings. The Africa group have their own meetings every Wednesday at lunch. The G77 also has their own meetings every Wednesday, not here, every Wednesday at 3 p.m., I do believe. Attend those meetings. if you don't understand something, that is where issues are going to be broken down for you in the most simplistic manner. That is where you will receive the history and the background of issues. If people like myself have been sitting down in the Fifth Committee since the 6-9 session, then obviously I was here when the Agenda 2030 was drafted. If Jill has been here and she knows and has a history of what happened during last year's CPC, Committee on Program and Coordination, and why it is that we didn't have a report for that particular committee, then you would like to sit with her during the committee's meetings or during your own group's meeting to get the history, because only then are you able to interpret or to have a position or a clear mind of the positions that you should take. So, colleagues, I just wanted to highlight those particular issues to say that, you know, all in all, it's very important to know your own position, know your group's position, and to ensure that you network within the group. I know that we are not going to be meeting immediately, but as the chair has said and as colleagues have said, I do believe that UNITAR will share some of our, and the Swiss mission will share some of our contacts. And also I then could encourage them that they can also share the contacts of the regional persons or regional chairs, if I should put it, of the G77 if you are from developing countries, of the Africa group if you are a member of the Africa group. Reach out to these groups and then start attending meetings so that you're including their WhatsApp page and their email platforms so that we can start getting the gist of preparations to avoid you joining the committee in October. Preparations are ongoing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Katlego. I particularly like this frank and illustrative exchange. I wish we could continue this. However, I think we're running out of time, and we still have one question that was written on our wall, and maybe you would wish to address it. Let me find it first. Yes, we were asked to elaborate on how the meetings are conducted given the COVID context. So with this opportunity, maybe you can tell us which of the practices during the 74th session will continue in the 75th session with the online meetings, etc. Thank you. This would be our last question unless somebody else indicates otherwise on our wall. Thank you.
No, thank you, Milena. Since we're out of time, what I can highlight is one of the key things, and I'm very happy that you all came up with the previous chairs, they came up with this Troika system. I've noticed one key thing. It actually has already started to have an impact because there are certain elements that have not been lost that actually I've noticed some of them even when Australia was chairing, and now also as per the previous chair, Cyprus when they were chairing. And some of these actually are this ongoing practice of even having the secretariat meeting with the bureau every now and then. Here's a typical scenario. If you don't meet with the secretariat doesn't know what is important for the bureau to have listed first amongst the agenda items to be introduced. So automatically the secretariat can decide that, okay, let's start discussing, for example, SPMs, and may forget the scales of assessments, which is Article 19 in our case, where it's important for us to have that before everything else. So I'm just giving an example that through the previous chairs, we've managed to at least start agreeing that let us meet constantly with the secretariat, let us meet constantly with the chair of the ACBQ, and then also let us continue the practice, which yes has been there for a couple of sessions, of ensuring that the summary of the meeting is consolidated and agreed upon by the entire bureau and then shared at the same time to the rest of our constituents. You can imagine if I, as Botswana, I'm sharing my summary a day before other bureau members, because information does travel, how that also would look. You can imagine if the summaries are different and have not been agreed upon, because we all interpret things differently. So these are some of the issues I think that we've picked as the incoming bureau to continue, to ensure that at least we share the summary and the same summary and consolidated same summary, and then to ensure that we also keep the practice of meeting constantly with both the Secretariat and the chair of the ECBQ. And then, because for them, I think the most important thing is we get to communicate the important agenda items that should be, put ahead and introduced as and when, due to the fact that it is our constituents who tell us what it is that they want first and what it is that they are willing to live without and have at a later stage. So these are just some of the things that I felt, as per your question, I would answer, since we don't have enough time to delve deeper into those particular issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to comment on what you said, from what we've heard yesterday during the UNITAR seminar, the committee will continue with somehow a hybrid format of meetings, meaning a combination of online and physical meetings. So the same practices, more or less, that were applied during the first and second resumed sessions of the 74th session will continue in the 75th session. And I guess more information on the practicalities will be conveyed by the new bureau in due time. That was some remarks just to address the question that was asked by our colleague from Djibouti. So thank you so very much to everyone, and especially to our speakers, for so willingly exchanging and sharing their own experiences. I wish to hope for everybody that we have a successful and a very adaptive session in this 75th session. The challenges will continue, but we will be there for one another, and you can count on the seasoned delegates that you just watched on your screen. I was now asked to pass the floor